Hunter, marriage is for grown-ups, I said, bending down to his level. But you said you want to marry, he insisted, his bottom lip jutting out. I can be a grown-up, see? He puffed out his chest, trying to look taller, more serious. It almost made me laugh. I'm sure you'd make a wonderful husband, I smiled, ruffling his curly hair. But you've got to wait until you're much older. Okay? He seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded, satisfied with the answer. Okay. But when I grow up, I'll marry you, Alison. Deal, I said, giving him a thumbs up. He giggled and ran back to his cartoons, his little feet pattering against the floor. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the aroma filling the air, mingling with the sound of laughter and cartoon noises from the other room. For a moment, everything felt still, manageable. I sipped the coffee, savoring its warmth, but the comfort it offered was fleeting. Gloria's words hung over me, sharp and cutting as ever. None too soon. You're what, 25? Yes, 25, and still living with my mother. A grown woman, reduced to sharing a roof with the one person who seemed to thrive on belittling me. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened, my breath coming short. Who you moving in with? Gloria had asked, her eyes gleaming with that familiar edge of skepticism. Actually, Ryan asked me to live with him. Ryan. He seemed to be the answer I'd been looking for, the one who'd finally give my life direction. Yet, even saying his name to my mother had felt like setting a match to a pile of kindling. Oh no. Seen how that plays out. He gets a live-in maid, till you fall preggers. Then you're stuck looking for new digs with a kid in tow. I took another sip of my coffee, trying to wash away the bitterness of Gloria's words. She never forgave me for being born, for the life that she believed my existence had stolen from her. Every day was a reminder of the debt she thought I owed, a debt that seemed impossible to pay. Alison, you're great with Hunter, she'd say, as if watching my sister's son was all I could aspire to. As if that was the only thing I was good for. I watched Hunter draw on the living room floor, crayons scattered around him. He was so innocent, so untouched by the world's harsh realities. His biggest concern was finding the right color for the sun in his picture. What color was I in his eyes? What shape did I take in his mind? Is that Chloe? Your mother? I'd asked him, pointing to the large figure in his drawing. No, that's you, Alison. Mommy's getting on the boat. I hadn't known how to respond. Chloe was always so distant, always off on some adventure, living a life I could only dream of. A life without the constant presence of Gloria, without the weight of expectations pressing down on her. I wished, not for the first time, that I could sail away, too. Leave behind the whispers of inadequacy, the constant comparisons, the feeling that I would never be enough. #. Later that evening, as I drove to work, the streets were buzzing with life. Cars honked, people chatted, and the city lights twinkled in the fading twilight. I called Ryan, needing to hear his voice, to remind myself why I was making these choices. Hey, babe, he answered, his voice warm and familiar. Great timing. Just came out of the darkroom. Got some amazing shots this weekend. He always sounded so excited about his work, about the life he was building. It was one of the things I loved about him, his passion for capturing moments, for creating beauty out of the ordinary. I told my mom, I said, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. And? His voice held a note of caution, as if he already knew what was coming. She wants me out. But not with you. There was a pause, then he laughed softly. I thought she liked me. It's not that, I said quickly. It's the situation. We have no plan. We're planning to live together, he said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice, a question left unasked. She's old-fashioned, Ryan, I said, trying to explain. She didn't say it, but I think she wants. Grandkids, he interrupted, his tone light, almost joking. Stability, I corrected, my voice firm. Like I said, a plan. It's complicated. "So, what do you want?" he asked. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. Why did he have to ask that? Why couldn't he just understand? "I don't know," I admitted. I need to know where we're going. I need to know that this is leading somewhere." Ryan was silent for a moment, then he sighed. "What do you say we take our time? You know." I heard the chuckle he tried to suppress, and it grated against my nerves. "Time. Whatever you say. All the time in the world." The conversation ended abruptly, leaving me feeling more confused than before. I parked my car in the lot and took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I couldn't afford to be distracted tonight. I had a job to do. Hashtag. Brandon's was already busy when I arrived, the soft hum of conversation filling the air. The bar was bathed in a warm, golden light, reflecting off the bottles lined up behind Ethan. He was already pouring drinks, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Alison, you're here," he called out, his face breaking into a smile. "Busy night." I nodded, slipping behind the bar to grab my apron. "Isn't it always?" Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "True. The usual suspects are in. Evan's over there, looking broody. Tyler just walked in with some clients. Should be a good night." I glanced over at Evan, slouched in his corner, nursing a bourbon. His eyes met mine, and he waved me over. I could feel Ethan watching, a smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, Alison," Evan greeted me, his voice smooth, almost lazy. "The usual. Jack Daniels, no water chaser, please." I signaled to Ethan, who nodded and started pouring. I placed the drink in front of Evan, who grinned up at me. "Marry me, Alison." The words caught me off guard, and I stared at him, not sure whether to laugh or be angry. "So, I can serve you Jack at home?" "Well, yeah. JD. And other stuff." "Evan, how would getting hitched change what we have here?" He shrugged, looking a little hurt. "We get along so well. Why not enjoy it 24/7? "I get it. And if I ever needed you for something, I'd find you here?" Evan's face fell, the playful light in his eyes dimming. "No, really. Let's go out." I shook my head, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Where will you take me?" "The parking lot. Your car's back seat." "You still live at home?" "I have a place. It's nice." He sounded defensive, his shoulders slumping. "Evan, I wasn't expecting this," I said, feeling a pang of guilt. "You shouldn't joke about such things." "Alison. I wasn't joking." "Then you need to work on presentation." "I'm in the middle of my shift." He opened his mouth to say something, but I had already turned away, focusing on the couple that had just walked in. I plastered on a smile, taking their order, but my mind was elsewhere. Back behind the bar, Ethan grinned at me, shaking his head. "You handled that well." "Thanks," I muttered, grabbing a tray. "Came out of the blue." "I mean, really? Think you can do better?" Meeting guys in bars, even a nice bar, is not a formula for. "But I met Ryan here," I shot back, feeling defensive. Ethan's look said it all. He set my customers' drinks on the tray, his expression unreadable. I left to serve them, my mind racing. When I returned, Ethan was waiting, his eyes thoughtful. "You want to get together?" I rolled my eyes, letting out a dry laugh. "Wow. I'm on a streak. We could put the nursery in that alcove." We both laughed, the tension easing for a moment. I glanced over at Tyler, who was chatting animatedly with his clients. He caught my eye and smiled, raising his glass in a silent toast. I smiled back, feeling a flutter of something in my chest. Tyler was different. He was confident, self-assured, but there was something else. A depth, a kindness that I hadn't found in anyone else. But he was a regular, a customer, and I was just the waitress. I pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on my work. The hours passed in a blur of orders and conversations, the clinking of glasses and the murmur of voices. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted, my feet aching, my head spinning. I drove home in silence, the streets deserted, the city asleep. The house was dark when I arrived, the only light coming from the moon shining through the windows. I locked the door behind me and went straight to bed, collapsing onto the mattress. But sleep didn't come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind churning with thoughts. Gloria's voice echoed in my head, her words cutting deep. Guys don't want kids. Don't care about marriage. Just want to mess around, shack up. What you have is a situationship. Was that all it was? A situationship? A convenient arrangement? I thought of Ryan, of his laughter, his touch, the way he made me feel alive. But was it enough? So, what do you want? Ryan's question lingered in the darkness, a whisper that wouldn't fade. What did I want? Stability? Love? A family? I didn't have the answers, and it scared me. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. But the questions wouldn't stop, circling around me like vultures, waiting to devour my peace. #. The next morning, the house was quiet. Hunter was still asleep, and Gloria was nowhere to be seen. I made myself a cup of coffee, savoring the silence, the brief moment of calm. But it didn't last. The doorbell rang, echoing through the house. I set my cup down and went to answer it, my heart sinking as I saw who was standing on the other side. Chloe. She was a vision of perfection, as always. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes immaculate, her makeup flawless. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, a stark contrast to my rumpled pajamas and messy hair. Chloe, I said, forcing a smile. What are you doing here? Good to see you too, sis, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She pushed past me, her heels clicking against the floor. I closed the door, feeling a surge of irritation. Chloe had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was Gloria's pride and joy, the one who had made something of herself. What do you want, Chloe? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. I need you to watch Hunter. I blinked, taken aback. What? Why? Because I have a date, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And I can't bring him with me. A date? I repeated, incredulous. You just got back. Can't you spend some time with your son? Chloe rolled her eyes, her expression exasperated. I spend plenty of time with him. But I have a life, Alison. I can't be tied down all the time. I felt a surge of anger, my hands clenching into fists. And what about me? Do you think I don't have a life? I have work, Chloe. I can't just drop everything because you decided to go on a date. She shrugged, unfazed. You're good with him. And it's not like you have anything better to do. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. You're unbelievable. Do you even care about anyone but yourself? Chloe's eyes flashed, her lips curling into a sneer. Don't lecture me, Alison. You're not exactly a shining example of responsibility. Living at home, waiting tables, dating a guy who won't even commit. You're one to talk. The words hit me like a slap, and I took a step back, my vision blurring with tears. Get out, I said, my voice trembling. Just get out. Chloe smirked, her eyes cold. Fine. I'll find someone else. But don't come crying to me when your life falls apart. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor. The door slammed shut behind her, and I was left standing in the empty hallway, my chest heaving with anger and hurt. I sank to the floor, burying my face in my hands. The tears came, hot and bitter, spilling down my cheeks. I cried for the life I didn't have, for the choices I'd made, for the love that seemed so far out of reach. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. The one who thought love could conquer anything. But most of all, I cried for the woman I was now, lost and confused, searching for something I couldn't even name. Hashtag. The day of the funeral was gray and overcast, the sky heavy with clouds. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and the wind blew cold, biting through my thin coat. I stood by the graveside, my hands clutching the edges of my coat, trying to keep warm. The coffin was lowered into the ground, the sound of earth hitting wood echoing through the cemetery. I felt numb, disconnected from everything around me. People spoke in hushed voices, offering condolences, but their words barely registered. I nodded and murmured thanks, but my mind was elsewhere. Gloria was gone. The realization hadn't fully sunk in, the finality of it all. I'd spent so much of my life under her shadow, trying to prove myself, trying to win her approval. And now she was gone, and all I felt was a hollow emptiness. Chloe stood next to me, her face a mask of sorrow. She looked perfect, as always, her makeup flawless, her hair perfectly styled. She'd cried, but even her tears were beautiful, glistening like diamonds on her cheeks. Hunter stood between us, his small hand gripping mine. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, searching for answers. "Is Grandma in heaven?" he asked, his voice small, tentative. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetie. She's in heaven." He seemed to think about this for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. "Okay. Can we go home now?" I nodded again, grateful for the excuse to leave. We made our way to the car, the wind tugging at our clothes, the rain beginning to fall. The drive home was silent, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the windshield. Chloe stared out the window, lost in thought, her face pale. I glanced at her, my heart aching with a mix of love and resentment. She was my sister, my flesh and blood, but there was so much distance between us, so much unspoken. "Chloe," I said softly, breaking the silence. She turned to me, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression wary. "What?" "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry for everything. For the way I've been. For not being there for you. I'm lost, Chloe. I don't know what to do." She stared at me, her eyes searching, and for a moment, I thought she might say something, might reach out. But then she looked away, her face hardening. "We all have our own problems, Alison," she said quietly. "You're not the only one who's lost." The rest of the drive passed in silence, the weight of her words settling over me like a shroud. I didn't know how to fix this, how to bridge the gap between us. I didn't know if it was even possible. The house was dark and quiet when we got home, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I put Hunter to bed, tucking him in, kissing his forehead. "Good night, sweetie," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Good night, Alison," he murmured, already half asleep. I closed the door behind me, the silence of the house pressing down on me. I made my way to the kitchen, needing something to ground me, to bring me back to the present. The coffee pot was still on the counter, a reminder of mornings spent with Gloria, her sharp voice cutting through the air. I reached for it, needing the familiar comfort, but my hand trembled, knocking the pot to the floor. The crash echoed through the house, the sound of breaking glass shattering the silence. I stood there, staring at the mess, my hands shaking. I felt the tears come again, hot and fast, blurring my vision. I sank to the floor, the cold tiles pressing against my skin, the smell of coffee filling the air. I cried for the life I'd lost, for the love I'd never found, for the family that was breaking apart. I cried for the woman I wanted to be, the one I couldn't find. And in the midst of my tears, a voice came, soft and gentle, cutting through the darkness. "It's okay, Alison. It's going to be okay." I looked up, my eyes meeting Chloe's. She stood in the doorway, her face soft, her eyes kind. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of something real. I reached out, and she took my hand, her grip firm, reassuring. Together, we sat in the kitchen, the pieces of our shattered lives scattered around us. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to put them back together.